The lioness was dying, and she knew it. Sarah Mitchell could see it in the way Naledi's ribcage moved in shallow, irregular spasms. She could see it in the swollen grey tongue hanging from the open mouth. She could see it in the eyes that should have burned with the ferocity of an apex predator, but instead stared glassy and sunken into skull-like sockets. But what made Sarah's heart nearly stop was not the dying lioness. It was the two tiny cubs trapped beneath Naledi's front paw. Even in semi-consciousness, even at the very edge of death, the mother maintained her final act of protection, keeping her babies pressed against her body, shielding them from the 113-degree heat that turned the air into distorted waves. The cubs were crying, high-pitched, desperate sounds that cut through the dead silence of the savannah like knives. They were trying to nurse, their small mouths seeking their mother's dried teats, but there was nothing. No milk, no hope. Naledi was so severely dehydrated that her body had shut down all non-essential functions, including milk production. Sarah knew with absolute certainty that without intervention, all three lions would be dead by sunset. And the protocols were clear: do not intervene. But these protocols were written for normal circumstances, and there was nothing normal about the apocalyptic drought that had turned Madikwe Reserve into a graveyard of sand and bones. If you love stories about impossible bonds between humans and wild animals, stories that remind us that compassion can bridge any divide, please consider subscribing to Wild Heart Stories. Every new subscriber helps us share more of these extraordinary true tales from the wild and strengthens our community dedicated to celebrating the remarkable connections that form when species choose trust over instinct. Your subscription means these stories reach more hearts around the world. The drought had lasted 87 days. 87 days without a single drop of rain touching the cracked earth of South Africa's Madikwe Game Reserve. The few remaining waterholes had become battlefields where elephants, lions and buffalo fought for survival with the ferocity of creatures who understood that each sip might be their last. The reserve, normally a lush expanse of golden grasslands and acacia forests, had transformed into something apocalyptic. The ground had split into deep fissures, creating a maze of cracks that swallowed anything small enough to fall through. Dead trees stood like skeletal sentinels, their branches reaching toward a merciless sky that refused to provide relief. Sarah Mitchell had been a conservation ranger at Madikwe for 12 years. She had seen droughts before. She had seen animals die. It was part of the job, part of the brutal honesty of nature that people who worked in conservation had to accept. But nothing in her 12 years had prepared her for the scale of death that unfolded during those 87 days. She had stopped counting bodies after the first month. Zebras collapsed in the shade of dead trees. Giraffe calves that simply lay down and never stood up again. Kudu with their tongues so swollen they could not close their mouths. And lions, the great predators who dominated these lands, reduced to skeletal shadows that could barely drag their kills. But even among all that death, nothing prepared Sarah for what she would find on that August morning when she followed the GPS signal of a young lioness named Naledi. Naledi meant star in Tswana, the local language. She had been named by researchers when she was just 6 months old, when her eyes still held the brightness that inspired her name. Now, at 4 years old, she was young to be a mother for the first time. The tracking collar around her neck had been placed 2 years ago as part of the reserve's predator monitoring program. Every hour, the collar sent a GPS ping showing Naledi's location. For 3 days, those pings had come from the exact same coordinates in the southern sector of the reserve. 3 days without movement meant death. Sarah knew it. Every ranger knew it. Animals who stopped moving stopped living. Sarah climbed into her dust-covered Jeep at 6 in the morning when the temperature was only 95 degrees instead of the 100 plus it would reach by noon. The drive to the southern sector took 40 minutes across 20 kilometers of terrain that had become almost unrecognizable. She passed what used to be a permanent waterhole, now just a bowl of cracked mud with the mummified remains of a warthog at its center. She passed a baobab tree that was over 200 years old, its massive trunk showing deep cracks from dehydration stress. Even the trees were dying. The GPS led her to a rock formation that created a small overhang, providing maybe 4 square meters of shade. It was the kind of place lions often used for denning, protected from the sun and hidden from view. Sarah stopped her Jeep 50 meters away and grabbed her binoculars. For 15 seconds, she saw nothing. Just rocks and dead grass and heat shimmer. Then she saw movement, slight, almost imperceptible, a tail twitching weakly in the dust. Sarah adjusted the focus on her binoculars, and the full horror of the scene became clear. Naledi was lying on her side, her body pressed against the rock wall where the shade was deepest. Her golden fur was matted with dust and streaked with what looked like dried saliva. Her ribs stood out so prominently that Sarah could count each one. The collar around her neck looked obscenely large against her wasted frame, and her breathing, Sarah could see even from this distance, was labored and irregular. But it was the cubs that made Sarah's hands shake so badly she almost dropped the binoculars. 2 tiny bodies, no more than 3 weeks old, were pressed against Naledi's belly. They were crying, their mouths opening and closing as they searched desperately for milk that did not exist. One of them, slightly smaller than the other, was trying to nurse, its small head pushing against its mother's dried teats with increasingly weak movements. The other cub had stopped trying and simply lay there, its small chest rising and falling rapidly in the heat. Sarah watched for 15 minutes, her heart hammering against her ribs. She watched Naledi's paw periodically flex, pulling the cubs closer, even though the mother lacked the strength to lift her head. She watched the cubs cry themselves into exhausted silence. She watched vultures begin to circle overhead, their shadows crossing the rocks in slow, patient rotations. The protocols were clear. Non-intervention. Nature was cruel, but human interference could be crueler. Wild animals who developed dependence on humans rarely survived long-term. Intervention could disrupt pack dynamics, create dangerous associations between humans and predators, or simply prolong suffering without changing the ultimate outcome. But Sarah had not become a conservation ranger to watch mothers die while their babies starved. She reached for her radio, her hand still shaking. When she pressed the transmit button, her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Dr. Botha, this is Mitchell, South Sector. I have a situation. It is complicated." There was static, then a response. "Define complicated, Sarah." "I have Naledi, the young lioness we have been tracking. She is dying, severe dehydration, and she has 2 cubs, very young, maybe 3 weeks. They are dying too." Silence on the radio. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. "I am on my way. Do not approach." "Understood?" "Understood," Sarah said. But even as she said it, she knew the understanding was a lie. Dr. Andries Botha arrived 40 minutes later in a jeep packed with medical equipment. He was a wildlife veterinarian with 25 years of experience, known throughout South Africa for 2 things: exceptional surgical skill and inflexible adherence to non-intervention protocols. He was the kind of man who would spend 12 hours performing delicate surgery on an injured leopard, then release it back into the wild, where it might immediately be killed by a rival male. He understood, perhaps better than anyone, that conservation was not about individual animals. It was about populations, about ecosystems, about letting nature function as it had functioned for millions of years. Botha parked his jeep next to Sarah's and got out, carrying his binoculars. He was a tall man, 62 years old, with skin like leather from decades under the African sun. He did not speak as he raised the binoculars to his eyes and observed Naledi for exactly 90 seconds. When he lowered the binoculars, his expression was the same one Sarah had seen dozens of times before. It was the expression of a man who knew death when he saw it. 4 hours, he said flatly. Maybe 5. The cubs have less. Without milk, without water in this heat. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Can we do anything? Sarah asked, even though she already knew the answer. Technically, yes. I could tranquilize her, administer intravenous fluids, rehydrate her system, supplement the cubs with formula. He paused, wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. But you know the risks, Sarah. If she wakes up associating humans with the trauma of intervention, she might abandon the cubs. Or worse, she could become aggressive near any human presence, and we would have to relocate her or euthanize her. We cannot create a dangerous lion. Sarah looked through her binoculars again at the dying mother and her starving babies. And if we do nothing? She asked, though she already knew this answer too. They die, all 3, probably by sunset. Silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of hot wind pushing dust across the barren landscape. In the sky above, more vultures joined the circle. Patient, certain. Sarah lowered her binoculars and turned to face Botha directly. Her voice, when she spoke, had a firmness that surprised even herself. I am going to approach her. I am going to try to gain her trust. Botha stared at Sarah as though she had lost her mind. Sarah, listen to what you are saying. That lioness might be weak, but maternal instincts are the last thing to die. You approach those cubs, she will use whatever strength remains to attack you, and even weakened, a lioness can kill a human in seconds. One swipe. That is all it takes. I know, Sarah replied, but if we stay at a distance, if we use tranquilizers, she wakes up terrified, without understanding, associating humans with fear. I need her to choose to trust. I need her to understand that I'm trying to help. That is impossible. Animals do not think that way. They operate on instinct. No. Sarah looked directly into Botha's eyes. You have worked with wildlife for 25 years. Have you never seen an animal make a choice that defied instinct? Never seen intelligence where there should have been only programming? Botha did not answer immediately, because he had seen it. They had all seen it. Anyone who worked closely with wild animals had witnessed moments that defied simple explanations of instinct and reaction. Moments that looked disturbingly like conscious choice. Give me 30 minutes, Sarah said. If it does not work, we use your methods. But let me try my way first. Botha was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he considered. Finally, he nodded once, sharply. 30 minutes, but I'm setting up tranquilizer equipment, and if she charges, I'm putting her down before she reaches you. Non-negotiable. Agreed, Sarah said. She spent the next 10 minutes preparing her equipment with hands that wanted to shake but could not be allowed to. 4 bottles of water, veterinary electrolyte solution, powdered formula for big cat cubs, a small metal bowl, and her voice, which was the only real weapon she had. When she was ready, Sarah looked at Botha one more time. He had positioned himself behind his jeep with a tranquilizer rifle, his face grim. He nodded at her. It was not encouragement. It was acknowledgement. Sarah began to walk toward the rock formation. Each step was deliberate, heavy with the knowledge that it could be her last. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat, but she kept her breathing steady. Predators could sense fear. They could smell it. She needed to project calm, even though every nerve in her body screamed at her to run. 30 meters. Naledi did not move. 20 meters. The lioness's head lifted slightly, just a few centimeters off the ground. Her ears rotated toward Sarah. 10 meters. Naledi tried to stand. Her legs trembled violently with the effort, muscles that no longer had the energy to properly support her weight. But she managed to get into a half-sitting position, her front legs braced wide to keep from collapsing. The cubs, startled by the movement, cried louder. And then Sarah saw what would haunt her dreams for years afterward. Naledi's claws were fully extended, completely unsheathed, each one a curved weapon designed to tear flesh from bone. Her mouth hung open, fangs visible even past the swollen tongue. Her entire body trembled, partly from dehydration, partly from the effort of staying upright, partly from pure, primitive protective instinct. But her eyes. Naledi's eyes were fixed on Sarah, and in them was something beyond defensive aggression. There was confusion, there was fear, and there was something that looked terribly, impossibly like consciousness, like awareness. The lioness knew she was dying. Animals knew, and she knew her cubs would die with her. Sarah stopped 5 meters away. She sat down on the dusty ground. She crossed her legs. She made herself small, non-threatening, vulnerable, and she began to speak. Naledi. Sarah's voice was soft, almost a whisper. It carried across the 5 meters between them like a prayer. I know you are afraid. I know every instinct is screaming at you to attack me, but you also know you are dying, do you not? You feel it. The lioness did not move, but her ears remained fixed on Sarah, rotating slightly to capture every sound. She was listening. I brought water for you, and food for your babies. They are hungry, Naledi. I can hear them. You can hear them too. Sarah moved with agonizing slowness, as though moving through thick honey. She reached for one of the water bottles in the pack beside her and placed it on the ground between them. The plastic made a soft sound against the dusty earth. I will not hurt them. I promise. Let me help. Please. What happened in the next 3 minutes would later be captured on the camera that Dr. Botha had mounted on his Jeep's dashboard. The footage would eventually be seen by millions of people around the world, and arguments would rage for years about what it really showed. Instinct? Intelligence? Something else entirely? Naledi, trembling so violently her whole body shook, slowly lowered her claws. Just slightly at first, then a bit more. The curved weapons that had been fully extended began to retract, disappearing back into the massive paws. Her mouth closed. The fangs vanished from view. Her swollen tongue slipped back inside, no longer hanging. And then, in a movement that defied 10 million years of predator evolution, the lioness lay down, not in an attack position, but on her side, exposing the cubs, vulnerable, completely, utterly vulnerable. She had made a choice. Sarah felt tears burning her eyes, but she could not allow herself to cry. Not yet. Not while Naledi was watching, reading her every movement for signs of threat. She moved slower than she had ever moved in her life. Each centimeter had to communicate safety, non-threat, help. When she was 2 meters away, she poured water into the small metal bowl. The sound of liquid hitting metal was immediate and electric. Naledi tried to lift her head, her dried tongue attempting to reach the moisture she could hear but could not yet see. Sarah pushed the bowl closer, closer, until it was just half a meter from the lioness's muzzle. Naledi drank, not elegantly. Her body was too weak for fine motor control. Water spilled from the sides of her mouth, darkening the dry sand beneath her. But she drank, and drank, and drank. Her tongue lapped frantically at the liquid, her eyes half closing with something that looked almost like relief. While the mother drank, Sarah, with movements that seemed to last eternities, reached for the 2 cubs. They were so small, they fit together in her hands. So light it seemed impossible they were lions. Their fur was soft as dandelion fluff, their eyes still the cloudy blue of newborns. They mewed weakly, their small mouths opening and closing. Naledi stopped drinking. her eyes fixed on Sarah, on the cubs in the human's hands. This was the moment when everything could collapse, when maternal instinct could explode, when the lioness could attack. Sarah spoke softly, her voice steady, even though her heart felt like it would burst from her chest. "I'm just going to feed them. You see, look." She showed the baby bottle filled with formula, and then something miraculous happened. The cubs began to nurse from the bottle. And when they heard the sounds of sucking, the small, satisfied grunts that infant mammals make when feeding, Naledi relaxed. Her head dropped back to the sand. Her eyes closed briefly. She understood. For 45 minutes, Sarah remained there in the dust beside a wild lioness who should have killed her. She fed the cubs, switching them on the bottle as each one drank their fill. She gave more water to Naledi, refilling the bowl 3 times and watching as the lioness drained it each time with desperate thirst. She wet a cloth and gently cleaned the sand from around Naledi's eyes and muzzle, and she talked the entire time, her voice low and constant, a thread of sound that seemed to anchor the impossible moment in reality. And Naledi allowed it. Every second that passed, the trust grew. It was visible in the way her body gradually relaxed, the way her breathing became less labored, the way her eyes began to lose some of their glazed distance. When Dr. Botha finally approached with the intravenous equipment for more serious rehydration, Naledi watched him but did not react aggressively. Her ears tracked his movement, but she did not tense. She did not expose her claws. She had made her choice, and these humans were help, not threat. Botha worked in silence, his face a mask of professional concentration. He inserted the IV catheter into a vein in Naledi's front leg with practiced efficiency, then connected the bag of electrolyte solution. The lioness flinched once when the needle pierced her skin, but she did not pull away. She lay still, her eyes moving between Sarah and Botha, as though trying to understand these strange creatures who brought water and food instead of fear. "I have never seen anything like this," Botha said quietly, his voice carrying a note of awe he usually reserved for successful surgeries. 25 years, and I have never seen a wild lion accept human proximity like this, especially a mother with cubs." "She chose to trust," Sarah said simply, still holding the cubs against her chest to keep them warm. "She knew she was dying, and she chose to trust." "Lions do not choose," Botha said, but there was doubt in his voice now. "They react. They operate on instinct and conditioning." "Then how do you explain this?" Sarah asked, gesturing to the scene around them. A dying lioness accepting intravenous fluids, a ranger holding newborn cubs, a moment of peace in a situation that should have been violent and fatal. Botha did not answer. He had no answer that fit within the frameworks he had used for 25 years. The IV bag took 2 hours to empty its contents into Naledi's bloodstream. During that time, the transformation was visible. Color began to return to the lioness's gums, which had been pale and grey. Her breathing became more regular, less gasping, and more rhythmic. Her eyes, which had been dull and sunken, began to show some of their former alertness. When the IV was finished, Botha removed the catheter and bandaged the site. "She needs at least 3 more treatments over the next 72 hours, he said. "And the cubs need to be supplemented with formula until her milk production returns, which could take a week." "I will come back," Sarah said, "every day, as long as it takes." "Sarah," Botha's voice was serious, "you understand this is temporary, yes? We can help her through this crisis, but then we need to step back. She needs to remain wild. The cubs need to learn to be lions, not pets." "I understand," Sarah said. "I am not trying to tame her. I am trying to save her." That evening, as the sun set and painted the sky in shades of orange and red that had become rare during the drought, Sarah sat in her small ranger station and wrote detailed notes about everything that had happened. She documented the IV placement, the amount of formula the cubs consumed, Naledi's vital signs as best she could assess them without proper equipment. But she also wrote something else, something that was not scientific or objective. She wrote, "Today I watched a wild lioness make a choice that should have been impossible. She chose trust over instinct. She chose to believe that the creatures she should fear were trying to help. I do not know if that means she's somehow different from other lions, or if it means we understand lions less well than we think we do. But I know what I saw. I saw intelligence. I saw decision. I saw something that looked exactly like hope." Sarah returned the next morning at dawn, and the morning after that, and the morning after that. Each day she brought water, formula, and more IV fluids. Each day Naledi grew stronger. And each day, the bond between human and lioness deepened in ways that defied explanation. By the fourth day, Naledi could sit up on her own. By the seventh day, she could stand and walk a few meters. By the 10th day, her milk began to return, and the cubs could nurse properly from their mother instead of relying entirely on formula. Through it all, Naledi never showed aggression towards Sarah. She would watch the ranger approach, her ears forward in attention rather than flattened in threat. When Sarah sat beside her to check the cubs or offer water, Naledi would sometimes rest her massive head on the ground near Sarah's leg, close enough that Sarah could feel the warmth of the lioness's breath. It was during the second week that something extraordinary happened, something that Sarah would later struggle to explain to skeptics who insisted she was anthropomorphizing. Sarah arrived at the rock formation to find Naledi gone. Panic seized her chest. Had the lioness abandoned the cubs? Had she been too weak to return from a hunt? Had another predator found them? But then Sarah heard a sound, a low, rumbling call. She turned and saw Naledi approaching from the east, dragging something behind her. As the lioness got closer, Sarah realized what it was, a small impala fawn, freshly killed. Naledi dragged the kill to the edge of the shade where Sarah usually sat. She dropped it. Then she looked directly at Sarah, made that same low, rumbling call, and stepped back. She was offering food to a human. A lioness was sharing her kill. "Oh, Naledi," Sarah whispered, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "Thank you, but I cannot. You need this. You and your babies need this." Naledi watched Sarah for a long moment, as though trying to understand the refusal. Then she picked up the fawn again and brought it to her cubs, who were still too young to eat meat but would begin learning in another few weeks. Dr. Botha, when Sarah told him what had happened, was silent for a full minute before responding. "That is reciprocity behavior," he said finally. "We see it between pack members, between individuals with established social bonds, but I have never heard of it between a wild predator and a human. Never." "What does it mean?" Sarah asked. "It means she sees you as part of her pride," Botha said, and there was something like wonder in his usually clinical voice. "She is treating you as family." By the third week, the drought finally broke. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon like a blessing, dark and heavy with promise. When the first drops of rain fell, Sarah was with Naledi and the cubs. The lioness lifted her face to the sky, mouth open, letting the water fall directly onto her tongue. The cubs, who had never felt rain, jumped and batted at the falling drops with their small paws. Sarah laughed and cried at the same time, relief and joy mixing until she could not tell them apart. That night the reserve received 6 inches of rain. Water holes began to refill. Grass started to grow. The cycle of life, which had paused in the brutal grip of drought, began to turn again. Sarah knew what the rain meant. It meant Naledi no longer needed her. The lioness was strong now, healthy. Her cubs were thriving. There was water again, which meant prey would return, which meant Naledi could hunt and provide for her family. It meant it was time to say goodbye. On the morning after the first rain, Sarah drove to the rock formation, knowing it might be the last time. The landscape had already begun its transformation. Green shoots pushed through the previously dead soil. Birds sang. The air smelled like earth and possibility instead of death and dust. When she arrived, Naledi was standing at the edge of the shade, looking out across the savannah with an alertness Sarah had not seen in weeks. The lioness was no longer the skeletal creature Sarah had found 21 days ago. She had gained weight. Her coat gleamed golden in the morning light. Her eyes were clear and bright, filled with the predatory intelligence that made lions apex predators. The cubs, now 5 weeks old, were wrestling with each other in the grass. They were healthy, fat, and loud. One of them pounced on the other's tail, and both tumbled in a ball of golden fluff and tiny growls. Naledi heard Sarah's approach and turned. For a moment, Ranger and Lioness simply looked at each other across 10 meters of rain-washed earth. Sarah took a breath and stepped out of her jeep. She had not brought medical equipment today. No IV bags, no formula, no supplies, just herself and the knowledge that this was goodbye. She walked slowly toward the rock formation, and Naledi watched but did not move away. The cubs noticed Sarah and came bounding toward her with the fearless enthusiasm of babies who had never learned that humans should be frightening. They rubbed against her legs, their small bodies vibrating with purrs that sounded like tiny engines. Sarah knelt and let them climb on her, their small claws catching in her uniform. She stroked their soft fur and memorized the feeling of their small bodies, the sound of their innocent mews. These cubs would grow into powerful predators who might one day see humans as threats or prey. But right now, in this moment, they knew her as the creature who brought food and warmth. Naledi approached slowly. She walked with the confident stride of a healthy lion, her muscles moving smoothly beneath her pelt. When she reached Sarah, she paused, standing tall and powerful just 1 meter away. Sarah slowly stood, keeping her movements calm and predictable. The cubs continued to play around her feet, oblivious to the weight of the moment. And then Naledi did something that would be replayed in Sarah's mind for the rest of her life. The lioness stepped forward, closing the distance to 1/2 meter. She looked directly into Sarah's eyes with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. And then, slowly, deliberately, Naledi lowered her head. It was a gesture that transcended species. In any language, human or animal, it meant one thing: gratitude. Sarah's hand moved before her brain could stop it. She knew it was dangerous. She knew one instinctive reaction from Naledi could cost her fingers, her hand, her life. But the moment demanded it. The relationship they had built demanded it. She reached out and gently touched the top of Naledi's head, right between her ears. The fur was warm and thick. She could feel the powerful skull beneath, the muscles that could crush bone, the predator that could kill her in an instant. But Naledi did not move. For 3 seconds, woman and lioness remained connected by that simple touch. 3 seconds that contained 21 days of trust built in the most impossible circumstances. 3 seconds that held water shared, hunger satisfied, fear overcome, and choice made. Then Sarah withdrew her hand and Naledi lifted her head. The lioness made a low sound, something between a growl and a purr, a vocalization Sarah had never heard before and would never hear again. Naledi turned, called to her cubs with a short grunt, and began walking toward the open savannah. The cubs scrambled to follow her, their small legs working hard to keep up with their mother's longer stride. Sarah watched them go. She watched until they were just golden shapes in the distance, moving through grass that was already ankle-high with new growth. She watched until they disappeared over a rise, and the savannah swallowed them back into wildness. She sat on the ground and finally allowed herself to cry, not from sadness, though there was that, but from joy, from relief. from the overwhelming knowledge that she had witnessed something most people would never experience, a moment of perfect understanding between species that should have been enemies. "She made it," Sarah said aloud to the empty savannah. "She's going to be okay." When she returned to the ranger station, Dr. Botha was waiting for her. He looked up from the paperwork he was reviewing and studied Sarah's face. "You said goodbye," he stated, rather than asked. "I did." "How is she?" "Strong, healthy, ready to be wild again." Botha nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "What you did, Sarah, it should not have worked. By every protocol, every guideline, every bit of experience I have, that lioness should have rejected human help. She should have attacked you. What you did was reckless and dangerous and violated every standard practice." Sarah waited, knowing there was more coming. "It was also," Botha continued, and now there was something in his voice that Sarah had never heard before, "the most remarkable thing I have seen in 25 years of wildlife veterinary medicine. You saved 3 lives by betting that trust could overcome instinct, that compassion could bridge the gap between species. And you were right." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the reserve that was slowly turning green again. "We are going to need to rewrite some protocols," he said quietly. "Not for every case, not as standard practice. But we need to acknowledge that there is more going on in these animals' minds than we have given them credit for. They can choose, they can trust, they can understand help when it is offered." "I think they always could," Sarah said. "We just did not give them the chance." Life at Madikwe Reserve returned to its normal rhythms as the rains continued. The drought ended not with a whimper, but with a roar of returning life. Within 3 months, the landscape was unrecognizable from the apocalyptic wasteland it had been. Grass grew waist-high, trees sprouted new leaves, waterholes filled to overflowing, animal populations began to recover. Herbivores gave birth to new calves and foals. Predators, no longer desperate and starving, returned to normal hunting patterns. The reserve was healing. Sarah tracked Naledi's GPS collar for months afterward, watching the small dot on the screen move across the reserve's southern sector. The lioness was hunting successfully, raising her cubs, living the life of a wild lion. She joined a small pride, 2 other females and an adult male, and her cubs were accepted into the group. Everything was as it should be. But Sarah wondered, sometimes late at night when she could not sleep, if Naledi remembered. Did the lioness think about those 21 days? Did she recall the human who brought water and food? Did she understand what had happened, or had it already faded into instinctive memory, indistinguishable from the general flow of survival? Sarah got her answer 2 years later. She was patrolling the southern sector, checking on the waterhole infrastructure that had been damaged during the drought. It was mid-afternoon, the heat softening into the gentler warmth of late day. She stopped her jeep on a rise that overlooked a wide stretch of golden grassland, and she saw 3 lions in the distance, 1 adult female, 2 adolescents nearly full-grown. Sarah raised her binoculars. Her heart began to pound before her mind consciously recognized what she was seeing. Naledi, the lioness, was magnificent. Fully mature now at 6 years old, she was at the peak of her physical power. Her coat gleamed in the afternoon sun. Her body was muscular and strong, showing none of the skeletal horror of the drought years. The 2 adolescents with her, a male and a female, were nearly her size now, their spots fading as they matured into adult pelts. They were hunting, stalking a small herd of impala that grazed unaware about 100 meters away. Sarah watched through the binoculars, fascinated as always by the fluid power of predators in action. Then Naledi paused. She stopped mid-stalk, her body going still, her head turned, ears rotating, searching for something. And then she looked directly at Sarah. The lioness was at least 400 meters away, too far for detailed eye contact, too far for recognition by any logical measure. But Sarah knew with absolute certainty that Naledi recognized her. They stayed like that for a moment that seemed to stretch outside normal time. Woman and lioness, separated by distance and species, and the unbridgeable gap that should have existed between wild and tame, predator and prey, instinct and choice. Then Naledi turned back to her hunt. She resumed her stalk, her adolescent cubs following her example. Within minutes, they made their kill, the young male bringing down an impala with a competence that spoke to good teaching. Sarah watched them eat, the lions ripping into their kill with the efficient brutality of apex predators. This was what Naledi was meant to be, not a creature dependent on humans, not tamed or changed, but wild and free and powerful. The lioness had not needed Sarah's help to remember how to be a lion. She had needed Sarah's help to survive long enough to remain one. That evening, Sarah sat on the porch of her ranger station and watched the sun set over Madikwe Reserve. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink and purple, colors that seemed more vivid after the rains returned. Somewhere out in the darkness, Naledi and her cubs were settling down for the night, their bellies full, their bodies strong. Sarah thought about the protocols, the rules, the careful guidelines that said humans should never interfere with nature. She thought about the countless animals she had watched die over 12 years because intervention was too risky, too problematic, too likely to cause more harm than good. And she thought about one desperate morning when she chose to break those rules, when she sat in the dust beside a dying lioness and bet everything on the possibility that trust could exist where it should not. That choice could overcome programming. That love, maternal love in all its forms, was powerful enough to bridge even the widest gaps. She had been right, but she also knew she had been incredibly, impossibly lucky. Another lioness might have attacked. Another day, another situation, another moment of crisis might have ended with tragedy instead of miracle. What happened between Sarah and Naledi could not become standard protocol. It could not be replicated in guidelines and training manuals. It was unique, unrepeatable, a single moment of grace in a world that usually operated by harsher rules. But it had happened. And that meant it was possible, and possibility, Sarah realized, was everything. The story of Sarah and Naledi spread throughout the conservation community. The footage from Dr. Botha's camera was analyzed by animal behaviorists, cognitive researchers, and wildlife experts. Some said it proved nothing, that Naledi was simply too weak to resist, and her acceptance of help was motivated entirely by survival instinct. Others said it was evidence of complex decision-making abilities in apex predators that science had not yet fully recognized. Sarah did not care much about the debates. She knew what she had experienced. She knew what she had seen in Naledi's eyes during those 21 days. She had seen choice. She had seen intelligence. She had seen a mother making the hardest decision of her life, to trust the species that should have been her enemy in order to save her children. And that ultimately was what the story was about. Not about protocols or scientific frameworks or theories of animal cognition. It was about a mother's love, about the impossible lengths a parent will go to protect their offspring, about the universal truth that transcends species, that a mother will do anything, even the impossible, to give her children a chance at life. Years later, when Sarah told this story to new rangers joining Madikwe Reserve, she always ended it the same way. We spend a lot of time in conservation, talking about populations and ecosystems and the big picture, and those things matter. They matter enormously. But sometimes it comes down to one mother and her babies, dying in the dust. And in that moment, all the protocols in the world cannot tell you what the right thing to do is. You have to decide. You have to choose. Just like Naledi chose to trust me. Nature is not always cruel, and it is not always kind. It is honest, it is real, and sometimes, if we are very lucky, it is also capable of grace, of choice, of trust that defies every logical expectation. I do not know if I would make the same decision again. I do not know if another ranger in another situation should follow my example. But I know this: on that August morning, a lioness chose to trust, and I chose to help, and together we created a moment that should have been impossible. And that possibility, that tiny crack in the wall between wild and human, that is worth remembering. Because it reminds us that we are not as separate from nature as we sometimes think. That the bonds between us, the potential for understanding, goes deeper than species, deeper than instinct, all the way down to something universal and inarguable. Love, in all its forms, is the most powerful force in nature. Naledi lived to be 13 years old, a good lifespan for a wild lioness. She raised 2 more litters of cubs successfully. Her offspring spread throughout Madikwe Reserve, strengthening the genetic diversity of the pride populations. She became one of the most successful breeding females in the reserve's history, and sometimes, when rangers drove through the southern sector, they would see her. Even in her final years, when her muzzle was graying and her movements had slowed, Naledi would pause when she heard engines. She would look at the vehicles with a directness that other lions did not show, as though she was searching for something, or someone. As though she remembered that once, when she was young and dying and desperate, a human had sat beside her in the dust and offered water. And in that moment of impossible trust, both their lives had changed forever.